Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Inside Boxing Weekly. I'm your host for tonight, Jeremiah Preisser, and with me I have, as always, my esteemed colleague, John Einreinhofer. How you doing, man?
Good to be here, Jeremiah. I got a lot of boxing viewing stored up inside, so I'm ready to spit plenty of this stuff out while I've got the chance.
Yeah. Well, I know when you're locked away and not on the show for a while, I know you got a lot to say. You really got to get that stuff out on air. So we're gonna, of course, as always, we're gonna give you that platform. And with Mike not being here, I'll roll out the red carpet for you as I typically do. So with that, we're gonna start with some of the previews from some of last week's fights, and I'm going to start pretty simple here. I am going to go with. Well, is there anything on the Kovalev Yarde undercard that particularly interested you? Did you happen to see the Makabu versus Papin fight, or was it just the Kovalev Yarde?
I saw some of the other stuff, Jeremiah. I didn't see that much of the cruiserweight fight. It just worked out where I didn't, but I saw a lot of undercard action over the weekend on ESPN Plus, DAZN, PBC. And I do have a general condemnation. I think we'll get to the Kovalev Yarde, and that was a very entertaining fight in the second half. It started out slow, but of course the matchup was quality in terms of significance. But with that said, and we'll be talking about that in a little bit, and we'll go over some of this other undercard stuff. But I thought really the combination of the ESPN Plus, DAZN and PBC undercards really were largely an embarrassment with all the mismatches and just blowouts. I like seeing knockouts, but it was just mismatch after mismatch, and I think that's a problem.
Yeah, well, it's a perpetual problem in the modern state of boxing that we've got. Actually, the Makabu versus Papin fight was not that bad, though. They were trying to get one up on Makabu, who dropped Papin, I think, twice. And it was really, I think, the knockdown in the 12th round which helped him win the cards. And really, it was more of like an 8-4 fight in his favor, so it shouldn't even have been that close. Papin was a pretty good fighter. Makabu, actually, he showed that, when Tony Bellew stopped him, he's proven, himself to be a top 10 guy in the division. He's pretty good hitter, pretty good inside fighter. So that fight was pretty good. The other, I fall in line with you, when it comes to your assessment of how good they were. There just wasn't a lot to like there. But Sergey Kovalev versus Anthony Yarde, I know, the large majority of us were picking Kovalev. We figured that, so long as he stuck to that boiled down style that he exhibited in the Alvarez rematch, he'd be able to get the job done. And that's pretty much what he did. I mean, he just stuck to the basics and kept behind the jab. He would throw the right hands and some other shots. He threw a lot of jabs to the body, but he wasn't really overcommitting. He wasn't throwing a lot of big power shots. And that's in one sense, it could prove detrimental to him because, if there was somebody like Yarde who maybe, was physically stronger, had more dedication, went to the body sooner, letting a guy hang around like that may prove his undoing one of these days, and it may be that case in the upcoming Canelo-Alvarez fight. But, of course, him overcommitting sometimes allowed him to be counterpunched, as we saw in the first Alvarez fight. But I thought it was a pretty good fight. I thought it was fairly entertaining. Anthony Yarde, even though he showed that he had a lack of experience, in my opinion, I thought it probably would have been helpful. So the step up to me was apparent because it seems as if, I think he's always going to be bothered because he's a muscle-bound kind of guy. That's always going to affect your stamina, but I think his stamina might have been better had he got in a couple of 10 or 12-rounders before he ever fought it. But how did you see this?
I saw the way Kovalev was fighting, I saw it like you did in that first half of the fight. But I was bothered in the first half of the fight that Kovalev, and he is a power puncher, and he's still got some of that left as he showed at the end. But during those first 6 rounds or so, I saw it like you did. He really he really wasn't showing much power, wasn't that accurate, you know, as McGirt was imploring him to do. When he was working the jab, you know, that was working for him, but there wasn't, you know, really wasn't that much accuracy, or his shots looked kind of slow and not that good. I thought Yarde, you know, I understand this is Yarde's first big fight. He's fighting over in Russia, things like that. But, you know, let's face it, and the scorecards reflected this, he really didn't do anything the first 6 rounds. So I thought people got a little, on the whole, carried away with Yarde's performance, because I saw it kind of like this. Didn't do anything really the first 6 rounds or so. You know, then he got to the point where he hurt Kovalev, and I thought that was totally legit in the sense that Kovalev was in bad trouble, and he was about to go. I mean, he was a few punches from going, and Yarde did go after him then. So I got excited like everybody else just watching that and the drama of the fight, and that was real, so to speak. In other words, I don't think that was illusion or overrated. I mean, Kovalev was in that bad a shape. He was hurt that bad. So I give credit to Yarde for doing that, but then after he did it, Kovalev got his act together. I think, like you said, he showed, maybe slightly surprisingly, because he was so cautious against Alvarez as well, that when he really opened up on Yarde, it wasn't long before he got him out of there. And that was even late in the fight, where, you know, one thing Sergey Kovalev is not known for and not going to be known for, despite this knockout, is his stamina. So I think it goes to what you said, that, you know, you wonder a little bit that with a Yarde who was, you know, maybe slightly intimidated and not doing much early, you know, could Kovalev have stepped it up a little early and actually got him out of there? You know, worked out for him, but it was a close one. And again, you know, for the people kind of high on the Yarde performance, you know, Kovalev's a power puncher. We did see him do this to another guy earlier in his career, but, you know, Yarde did, even though he was tired, he got taken out with a jab. So, you know, people were talking about Yarde's chin, and in all my years watching boxing, even though Kovalev's a power puncher and Yarde got tired, I'm going to be cautious about praising a guy's chin who gets taken out with a jab. I'm not going to do that. So I think the jury's still going to be out on Yarde, even though he's a young guy. Like you said, muscle-bound, the stamina wasn't that good. There's some power there, but he wasn't winning rounds in the fight. I guess you could say this for a lot of people, but I think down the line it's going to come down to, you know, who else is still around in the division. Some of these top guys are in their 30s, getting older, starting with Kovalev, and, you know, maybe they won't be around in a few years or around effectively. And, you know, Yarde's a bit younger, but if there's a lot still around that's effective, I don't think he's going to be that much of a force.
No, I don't either. In fact, I look at the landscape, and you know, even though Peter Beev, I think everybody but, who is it, Bivol is in their 30s at the moment. And I look at, you know, technicians who are a little bit younger. That's pretty much all these guys. I mean, Gavatstik, Bivol. I mean, to me, Bivol is the most stylistic. He has the most stylistic similarities to Sergey Kovalev, but at this point, I just think he's sharper. But he's also, I think, more defensively minded. So, you know, Yarde fighting somebody like him, I think, would be, you know, borderline a disaster. I don't see. I just don't see him hanging with the best guys in the division. And like you said, there are people who are, I think, being a bit too praiseworthy when it comes to Anthony Yarde, because he really wasn't doing that much up until the 8th round. I mean, he looked like he was devoid of answers in regard to that jab. And, you know, there was a lot of, you know, press given to how he, you know, wasn't doing any hard sparring or anything like that. I've heard that he does do sparring. It's just hard sparring is another thing, and, you know, maybe it's the trainer feels that you're wearing a guy out too quickly, but, you know, that's the closest thing you're going to get to a fight. So it seems to me, and most others, is that, you know, you should probably do it at least a little bit. But, yeah, he just had no answer for the jab. You know, he would try to parry it. You know, he would try to throw a few counter shots, but it was the dominant figure in the fight. And I thought, like you, that Kovalev, to me, he just looks more faded. You know, I still think he's got a nice, sharp jab. It's still accurate. It's still powerful. But it's just, he looks more faded to me. And I don't think any of us should be surprised by that. I mean, the guy is on the plus side of 36. And so, I mean, I wanted to throw this out there anyways. How do you see, like, a lot of people are giving, a lot of play to this on Twitter, on Facebook. The whole potential Canelo Alvarez versus Sergey Kovalev showdown. How do you see that? Because I've noticed that, guys like Michael Montero, who's a buddy of mine, I've noticed that at first he was pretty clear in saying that, Canelo Alvarez will get on the inside and break him down the body, maybe something like a mid-round stoppage. And a lot of people seem to follow that logic. But now I see a few more people start to say, hey, well, Kovalev's the naturally bigger guy. Is Canelo going to have an easy time getting around that jab? And I still see the vast majority of people picking Canelo Alvarez, but how do you see it?
I mean, I think, like you said, I think what I saw against Yarde, Kovalev's clearly seen better days. And I'm looking a lot in those first 6 rounds, and then, which, even though Kovalev, I had him, clearly way ahead in the fight, he got hurt badly and let Yarde rally and almost got stopped. So that was a problem. But like showing again what we think Yarde is, I'm thinking of guys that are younger coming up. I mean, like I don't think a Yarde would beat like a Gilberto Ramirez or a Jesse Hart even. So I think those guys just bring more to the table than Yarde. Yarde only had 15 amateur fights, But getting back to Kovalev and Canelo Alvarez. But Kovalev does have the good jab, as you said. He's 6 feet tall, so he is taller than Canelo. Canelo's got a really good chin. I find the fight real interesting. But Kovalev, there's no doubt he's still one of the top 3 light heavyweights in the world, and that's one of the toughest divisions in the world. So anybody saying that this is going to be easier a gimme, it's not. I think Canelo's clearly a favorite at this point, but I think the people, and some people that even knew what they're talking about were saying this, and I don't think it's going to play out that way, that, we're talking that Canelo is going to be a huge favorite opening up and things like that. I don't see that. He'll be a favorite, but I don't think he'll be a massive favorite or anything like that. He'll probably be a solid favorite, but he's got to get Kovalev past Kovalev's jab, like you said. I think, even though Kovalev can be hurt to the body and Canelo does that well, I don't think it'll all be about the body like people are thinking. I think what, to me, it comes down more to is, Canelo's got good defensive skills and he's fast. People, I think, know he's fast now, but they probably underrate how fast he is and think of how fast he's going to be at light heavy. So it's going to be a matter of, closing the distance. Although, sometimes you see Canelo where he can fight off the ropes as well. I mean, you've seen him do that. You've seen him do that against a guy like Chavez Jr. He did it in the first Golovkin fight. So, you never know with him. I mean, everybody's thinking move forward, work the body, but, he could choose to lay back and make Kovalev miss and counter him some. I'm not saying he'll necessarily do that, but it's not out of the realm of possibility because Kovalev's a strong guy. But I think the speed of Canelo, what I'm looking at, will probably be too much. I mean, he may not, even though Kovalev's got hurt in recent fights, Canelo might not hurt him right off. It might be later in the fight where Kovalev gets a bit tired and he can't keep up with Canelo's hand speed or something like that, kind of an accumulation. But, I'm a lot of fights, you got Rocky Fielding, but you throw that out to me. Canelo hasn't been banging. Golovkin's got a great chin, but still, Canelo didn't really hurt Jacobs. He hasn't been banging all that hard lately in a lot of his fights. So at light heavyweight, he might not be bringing that much power. It'll be more the speed, but I think he's the solid favorite. I'll pick him to win, but I think I'm in the camp that thinks it's a very intriguing fight. It's when you're fighting a top 3 light heavyweight, from what we don't see from guys nowadays. I mean, this is something that's kind of a throwback step up like that. So I like the fight a lot. I think if DAZN, as some speculation comes in now, and that's the date that's been thrown out there, I do have to agree with this. For a positive for DAZN. If you look at even what the odds on the fights would be compared to some of the other fights that aren't as close, you take, if DAZN can give you, Triple G and Derevanchenko, then, Canelo Alvarez and Kovalev, and followed up with Ruiz and Joshua, those are three big name within the boxing community, competitive fights 3 months in a row. That's pretty good.
Yeah, and I've heard DAZN is intentionally doing that. They want a big fight each month. But yeah, I just wanted to, plug in a few notes on my feelings on Kovalev Alvarez, and that is one thing that I find intriguing, and maybe some people are starting to, fall in line with that logic as well. But Canelo Alvarez, he's not a big puncher at 160 pounds. I don't have a fear that he can't wear the weight well. I mean, he's already been above the light heavyweight division going into the ring multiple times. I mean, I remember he weighed 174 pounds going into the ring against Austin Trout. I believe it was. But, yeah, it was something like 174 against Trout. So he's been around that weight for years. It's just a matter of, how much weight does he actually put on after he weighs in. So I hope that he stays light, because I think that would be the best game plan is, to use your speed. But, yeah, I think it's interesting because, you look at the way his punches you look at his punches against Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., who does have a damn good chin, but we saw how good that chin was against legitimate light heavyweight, punchers against guys like Fonfara. So I do find that particularly interesting, and I do think the styles are going to mesh pretty well. I think Canelo would probably have a tough time, sitting on the ropes and trying to counterpunch, just because it seems as if Kovalev may stay safe, especially with Buddy McGirt being in his corner now. It seems as if Kovalev would have a pretty reserved approach if Alvarez chose to back against the ropes, probably just sticking with the jab and whatnot. No, not overcommitting with the right hand. But it's a damn good fight. A lot of people are giving, I've seen some people give Canelo Alvarez too much flack for this proposed bout, and I don't understand it. I mean, yeah, I understand the whole, Gennady Golovkin situation, and, some people would rather see that. But this is a hell of a substitute. I mean, there are not very many guys taking these sort of risks. I mean, you look at the boxing landscape, and you look at, Golovkin seems pretty content at 160. Yeah, Inua's jumped a few traditional. I mean, he's jumped like one traditional weight class, and that's cool, but he hasn't taken on the level of opposition that Alvarez is. So I think Alvarez should get a bit more credit than some guys are giving him. But, yeah, I think it's, these tribal interests where some people are in the Golovkin camp or in the Andrade camp or whatever it may be. He's taking legitimate steps to be a great fighter.
Yeah, I don't get the people knocking it, because where you can't knock it is Kovalev has been one of the top guys in the sport. I mean, it's not long ago that he was considered one of the top pound-for-pound fighters. You and I both thought he won the first fight against Andre Ward. And, we both picked Ward in the second fight, and we were right, but which is hard to do with you kind of got to reverse it like that. But because I did pick Kovalev in the first fight, I thought he won it. And, of course, it was a controversial decision. But, he's not that far from removed to that. He had the Elidir Alvarez loss, but he avenged that. So, yeah, the knocking it, yeah, he's a little bit older. But, let's face it, we all know this when there's selections of opponents, too. Kovalev's still a puncher. Whenever you're going up in weight, this is a legitimate weight class jump from middleweight to a traditional original 8-weight class light heavyweight, and you're fighting a puncher, even though he's 36 years old. I mean, that's risk right there, because usually when guys don't want to take a risk and they're moving out, but they want to minimize the risk, they fight somebody who can't punch, and that's not the case here. So I don't think there's really any if Kovalev was at the point where he was like the number 10 light heavyweight at this stage or something like that. He picked up another loss. That's different, but that's not the case. I'm not saying he necessarily is, but there's a legitimate argument you could say he's the best in the division. I'm not saying necessarily is, but I mean, if somebody would make that argument for Kovalev, it's not a crazy argument, based on his past track record and avenging the Alvarez loss. Transnational did have Yarde ranked 10. So, he at least there was a top 10 guy. I didn't really necessarily agree with that, but I mean, that's a legitimate legitimate organization, that you're a part of, that, and the Ring, we can look at those ratings at least with some credibility, and, we can't look at the alphabets or BoxRec or something like that. So Kovalev's still right there, so I don't think that the criticism is valid. I mean, like you said, these are the kind of risks that I don't even have to go back 30 years on these types of risks. These are the type of risks we were seeing more 15 years ago. I mean, I'm not saying John Ruiz was a world beater, but, Roy Jones went up to heavyweight. He was a top 10 heavyweight. Roy Jones went up and fought him. I mean, that's going back, like 15 years or something like that. I mean, we're not getting things like that nowadays. No. So, right. I mean, like we're used to harkening back sometimes 35, 40 years. This is like stuff that we're not getting like what a James Toney did or a Roy Jones did 15 years ago, and that's what excites me about this is like, hey, at least we can turn back the clock 15 years. If we can't get back 35 or 40 years, at least we can get back 15 years.
Right. Well, anyways, let's move on to a few fights that I see on the schedule, and we'll pound these out fairly quickly because they're not that intriguing. But I just wanted to go with the Jeff Horn Zerafa fight. Jeff, I don't know if his long-term goals are at 160. I'm not exactly sure. 154 might seem like it's a better fit, though I don't care about the weight class. If we could make 147, I don't know, but. Yeah, he's fighting Zerafa, who was starched in one round by Peter Quillen. This just seems like it's a stay busy fight until he lands on something big, and that big, or so I've heard, at least from the rumor mill, that he might get Riyado Murata after this. But what do you think about the fight? What do you think of the prospect of fighting a big middleweight like Murata?
Yeah, I think that Horn, They seem to want to, lately push him towards a somewhat significant middleweight fight. And, the fights he has in between, of course, the guy has been in with Manny Pacquiao and Terrence Crawford, but, some of the guys he fights in between are not particularly good, to say the least. And, Zerafa, yeah, he got knocked cold, brutal knockout by Quillen, a few years back on a PBC card. He's not really, frankly, at this level, he's just not particularly good. I've never been that high on Horn. Even as he got by with Pacquiao, I thought he lost the fight. I felt that you could make a case for him. I didn't think it was an outrageous robbery like Teddy Atlas and some people were screaming, but I didn't really think he did quite enough to win that fight, and he was out on his feet in the 9th round. Just saying that then he wasn't competitive against Crawford. I do think he's going to get a middleweight fight like Murata. I'm trying to think that. Before Murata, there was even another, maybe, well, it's really along the same lines. I guess they were talking Rob Brandt before that, weren't they? But I've seen enough legitimate talk in recent months about him getting a top 10 type of middleweight like the level of a Brandt or a Murata that I do think it's going to happen, and it's why he's getting these relatively easy opponents in between. So I think it's going to happen, but then getting to your question, when it does happen, Horn is a strong guy. I felt that. I mean, he is a physically strong guy. So, I mean, even though he was at 147, he probably, in that sense, is probably thinking he can be a middleweight. But I just don't think he's got the overall skill set or abilities. And then moving up at weight, he's not going to be able to muscle those guys as much. And Murata's a big puncher at middleweight. So I would think Murata would blow Horn out of there pretty quickly, but I'm with you. I think that fight, probably will happen. I think that's likely to happen. It'll probably be a, ESPN Plus type thing in the U.S. and with Top Rank sponsoring it. So I think that could happen.
Yeah. Well, and it's going to sell big too. I mean, I think that's one of the big reasons why they're looking at it is because Horn is a name now. He sells well. I think the Australians will travel. I mean, my guess is it might be in Japan, but either way, it's going to be a big sell because anybody who follows Murata even slightly knows that he's huge in Japan. I mean, I know his fights garner like over 10 million views. I think he had something like 11 million people watch his fight on television last time out. Again, Horn is up.
8.9 million, I think, which is impressive, though. I thought I saw something like that. So, yeah, I mean, that's huge ratings for boxing nowadays. Let's face it, even in Japan.
Yeah, right. So I fall in line with you. I do think stylistically it's kind of an interesting fight, if only because I think Jeff Horn has better feet than Murata. Murata, he just seems a bit of a plotter sometimes. But then again, I don't think Horn is going to move as well as Brandt, so that does look like a stoppage victory to me. I did want to ask you one other thing, though, now that it just kind of cropped into my mind. How do you rate Jeff Horn's performance against Pacquiao compared to Keith Thurman's?
Let's see. Yeah, that's a good question. I thought. I mean, I guess I guess you'd have to say, yeah, that fairly enough.
Tough, huh?
Probably would have been somewhat similar, really, because Thurman got knocked down early. Horn didn't get knocked down early, but he was almost out in the ninth, and then Thurman did get hurt badly by a body shot late in the fight against Pacquiao. And Horn, of course, got the decision. Thurman did not, but I didn't think Horn actually won. So, yeah, but it was similar type of thing in rounds. So, yeah, it's strange because I'm not saying that I don't think Horn could do anything with Keith Thurman, but in terms of the way the fights played out competitive wise, wasn't too much of a difference. I would have to give you that.
Yeah, I don't know. I for some reason I thought it was interesting because it almost struck me as if Keith Thurman would have got the decision against Manny Pacquiao. How would people have looked at it compared to Jeff Horn's performance? I don't know. It struck me as something that I thought was intriguing, and of course it's all styles. But to me, it seemed clear that Jeff Horn, even though he did look like he was in bad shape there, he did look like he took the punches a bit better. Anyways, we'll move on to something which is pretty low key as well. And that's Peter Quillen fighting a substitute in Alfredo Angulo. Angulo is shot. He did get a victory in his last fight, but then again, it's the same guy, Julio Cesar Chavez, just stopped in a round with a body shot. I watched that fight, actually, and the guy that Chavez Jr. fought he just was not very good. That's all I'm going to say. So Quillen is Quillen is fighting a shot Angulo. Originally, we were supposed to get Caleb Truax, and I was hoping for that fight because I thought that was an intriguing matchup, but we're stuck with this.
Yeah, this is turning out to be a bad card. Truax Quillen, that's a close odds fight, and PBC was trying to have that. They had the first time around, but the fight started late. That card was way off of timing, and it started so late that was bad. So that whole card, in that sense, didn't work out well. So they're trying to do it again. Truax can't fight, had an injury. So we get Angulo, who even in his advanced age, he always comes to fight, but you just get the feeling it just hasn't been good for his health for years. Not that boxing's particularly good for anybody's health, but especially when you've lost it like Angulo has. So you get mixed emotions because you do like the action the guy provides, even in his diminished state. I mean, he has some punching power. I mean, it's very hard for him to land at this stage of his career on a lot of people. But I think there is some power there. But Quillen's a power puncher, even though he's fighting at 168 pounds there. I think the power will still show itself in the right situation, and this could be it for him. That's why I do worry some for Angulo. Not that Quillen's what he was either. He's had too many layoffs at this stage, fighting at a higher weight. But I still think, with Angulo, he's a target that's right there for you who just doesn't have any defense whatsoever. He didn't even in his prime. And I think if you're going to let a guy like Peter Quillen, who does have power like that, tee off on you when you don't have much left, like Angulo, it might be a little bit of action for a few rounds, but it's not going to end well. So we might get some action, but it just doesn't seem to me to be something that's good for Angulo. But he wants to keep on fighting, and here he is, but not a particularly good card.
No. Angulo should just go out there and try to blitz him. That's all. I mean, I was hoping Angulo would get Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. I'm not a fan of either of these. Angulo was fun during his prime, and he was a real puncher. I mean, his fight with James Kirkland was damn good, but I would have rather seen Chavez Jr. versus Angulo just because there's a bigger selling point. I know there's going to be some action. I think it's going to be a bit longer, but yeah, this just comes across as a mismatch to me. I'm picking Quillen by stoppage, hopefully early, get him out of there, get him out of his misery. Anyways, let's move on to something else. We've got Erislandy Lara versus Ramon Alvarez. Yeah, he's fighting another Alvarez, and in his mind, which is a bit, I don't even know why they wasted funds on the video to produce these sort of face-offs in this fight. Just seems like they could have spent it somewhere else. In fact, I saw somebody say something pretty funny and said they should have just donated whatever the funds it took to create the video to create these face-offs. They should have just used it for CTE research, and that seems like it would have been money better spent because Ramon Alvarez, he is Canelo's brother, but he's clearly not on the same playing field. He is a guy who was stopped by Brandon Rios, I think, at a catch weight of 151 pounds in November of last year, if I'm not mistaken. And then he eked out a split decision. Who knows? I haven't seen the fight. That means he probably lost, knowing the politics of the game. But he eked out a split decision against a guy that Anthony Fowler bowled over in one round. And now, somehow, he's getting a shot at Erislandy Lara, and a big unfortunate aspect tied to this is they're touting it as a quote-unquote title fight. It's bullshit. You and I, both know it's bullshit. It just seems like a give-me fight for Erislandy Lara.
Yeah, I agree. And, Ramon Alvarez he just simply isn't on this level. I mean, he's not a world-class fighter, even with 7
never has
classes. Been. Never has been. I mean, this is not like a guy, right, that's faded that was. I mean, that's what's really bizarre about this fight. I mean, this guy, he never even was on this level at any time. It's just, PBC's doing this. I have a problem with it. You really have to kind of, if you look at it from the U.S. perspective at the least, you got these three main entities now. You got PBC, you got the DAZN with Eddie Hearn and some Golden Boy, and then you've got the ESPN Plus with the Top Rank guys, and then, they've got a deal where Top Rank brings in the Warren guys, and, they work a little bit with main events. But the point is, I'm just really tired of this. I think this is a little bit. We look at competition being good, but this in a weird way is where competition has perversely sort of been bad. And what I mean is this: I want the fighters to make as much money as possible. I want their health preserved. I'd like to see them, have pensions and health insurance, life insurance available for the fights in significant amounts. But with that all understood, you got to fight somebody. And what I mean about where the competition's been bad is in this rush for these platforms to pick up fighters, it almost seems like to cater to the fighters and keep them happy, that they feel like they just have to keep showcasing them against these soft touches. In other words, everybody's got to get an appearance every 5 or 6 months and, get their TV spot. And like you said, they do a regular highlight and a face-off. For fights that are garbage, just nothing. They're just I always call them showcases because that's all they are. It's one guy being showcased, in this case, Erislandy Lara, and the opponent's meaningless. He's not expected to be competitive or win. It's not expected to be entertaining. We're not getting this fight because it's entertaining. It's just a showcase for one guy, and they're all doing it. I mean, you had that in that DAZN card that Hearn had from Mexico Saturday night when you got Hrgovic blown away a second straight inept opponent. Jono Carroll, who's got 3. What do we need to showcase of Jono Carroll for? The guy's got 3 knockouts.
Yeah, and I wasn't even that impressed, to be honest.
Right, that's what I mean. Why in God's name are we showcasing Jono Carroll?
Yeah, because he had one game performance against Tevin Farmer. Come on.
That's what I mean. Like, in other words, these are good examples. It's just like the Lara fight. In other words, like, I mean, they're not showing like you show. I mean, this is the way cards should be promoted. They even today they should be like. If you're gonna show John O'Carroll, he's got to be in the entertaining fight that night that he might lose against somebody that's tough. Like you don't show him. Showcase him for what? I mean, even I hate saying it, but Lara has been a top fighter, but even this late in his career, I mean, what are we showcasing him against Ramon Alvarez for as a headliner? I mean, he doesn't have that much time left. He's got to be in against, a real opponent, even though he's fought a lot of tough ones.
And PBC has the guys.
Yeah, exactly. PBC's got the guys. That's where it's just like I said, catering to the fighters, where I want the fighters taken care of to make good money, but I want them in competitive fights where they could lose to do it, and that's what we're not getting from any of these platforms, except for a fight here and there. Top Rank at least is going to have they haven't been doing things like this, but they're going to have Gvozdzik and Beterbiev, on regular ESPN. That's the thing we're missing. It's like when PBC, to their credit, because it gets forgotten too easily, I mean, they gave you Thurman Porter and Thurman Garcia on CBS. That's what these packages are missing now. Every once in a while, you got to give the fans a showdown, of top guys that's close to even money, and not have it not be pay-per-view or where you got to pay somewhere or other. Just give the fans a good showdown once in a while.
Right. So, yep, we're not getting that. Like I said, PBC has the guys. They could have served him up any number of guys. I mean, there are plenty of opponents for him, minus, J-Rock and, Jarrett Hurd. They're trying to finalize the rematch. That's cool, but there's plenty enough. I mean, they could have done a Castano rematch. Anything. I mean, this is just...
What about a guy, you just reminded me, because you're right, like a good idea, like a PBC's got him. What about a guy like a Nate Gallimore even? I mean...
Right.
Just like somebody who, it's a real fight. I mean, you don't waste an FS1 day on Lara against Ramon Alvarez. To me, that's where the PBCs, they had their ups and downs with that, but it's kind of going wrong with some of that again now. But it is with the other guys too. I mean, there's nobody like.
Oh yeah. Nobody's immune.
No, nobody's immune. Exactly, nobody's immune. That's the problem. Is that they're all kind of having the got to go to the Teddy Atlas. It's like the promoters are having the unspoken agreement where you don't go too hard against me with good fights, and I won't go too hard against you.
Did he say that on a podcast or?
Well, he always used to say that on Friday Night Fights. He would talk about two fighters in there where they have the unspoken agreement where they're not going to go that hard against each other, which you would see that. You see that sometimes. Let's face it. It just when it kind of devolves into neither guy's going to really go too hard against the other guy, and they're going to be content to go the distance. It's almost like the promoters are doing that against each other they'll put cards on the same night against each other, but they won't. But a lot of them won't be good fights, like a lot of last week. There's rumors of that in December, but it's one of those we'll have to believe it when we see it. In other words, they'll put them on the same nights, but a lot of times they won't all put good fights on the same night.
Yep, and the cycle continues. And cycling through our coverage, we're going to move on to something a bit more entertaining, and I use the bit loosely. It's not going to be that much more exciting, or at least I don't think so. And I say that because Huey Fury is fighting Alexander Povetkin. Fury is a bit like his brother stylistically. He's a mover, he's a jabber, but he doesn't have the personality, he doesn't have the skill, he doesn't have the size. That's not to say that he isn't a bad fighter. I mean, against Joseph Parker, he was competitive. It was a pretty lackluster affair, but he didn't look like he was, outgunned completely. He looked as if he was about the same level as Joseph Parker. Again, I thought Parker won clear enough. But it was clear enough that there wasn't a huge gap in talent there. He's fighting what I believe is a 39 or 40-year-old Alexander Povetkin. Povetkin was pretty competitive against Anthony Joshua. Hard to say what he has left. Let's see. my thoughts on this, and I think most people would side with me. I've seen a lot of people think that this is pretty close, and they wouldn't be surprised either way. I kind of fall in line with that too. Again, I don't know exactly what Povetkin has left at this point. I do know that they are doing VADA testing. I did see VADA, every once in a while on Twitter and on Facebook, they'll say, hey, welcome to the club. We're glad to have you for this set amount of time. So I do know that they both are doing drug testing for this, which is a positive, albeit a small one. Again, when you're only testing for a month, 2 months, or 3 weeks, whatever it is, it's hard catching guys, but it's better than nothing. Anyways, I think this is going to play out like a lot of us think. Fury is going to move, he's going to box, he's going to try to stay at distance. Povetkin is going to try to work his way inside. And what I think is that Povetkin showed enough against Anthony Joshua that he should be able to get the Huey Fury. I think that he's a tough enough guy and still skilled enough that he should be able to break him down. What say you, John?
Well, you make a good point about the odds on this fight are close. If it weren't for Fury's style, when you consider that Povetkin is still legitimately a top 10 heavyweight, this would really be in terms of competition, maybe the fight of the weekend, but the fly in the ointment is Huey Fury's style. Is that he's only competitive, by size and just defending, and he just doesn't generate any significant offense. And I guess people are looking at Povetkin's age in this fight. But again, the odds are close. Povetkin's a slight favorite, but not a big favorite. But I think that Huey Fury just doesn't generate enough offense, and this is a lot of times where I'll look at the fighter himself, because the fighter's got to be in there. I'm looking at this, and I'll look at this with a lot of guys. It doesn't mean they're right, but I do put stock in it. Povetkin didn't want Usyk. I mean, this is from credible sources, not just wild speculation. But
yeah, he didn't want Tyson Fury either.
He didn't want Tyson Fury either. And then he basically picks out Huey Fury and says, yeah, give me him. So, I look at that and I say Povetkin thinks he can beat this guy because he wasn't confident about going in against Usyk or Tyson Fury. So he believes he can beat this guy. And I think it's just Huey Fury doesn't generate enough offense. So, Povetkin had trouble with big guys that brought the power, Joshua and Klitschko. And, he doesn't have to worry about Huey Fury bringing any kind of potent offense like that. So, and I think with Povetkin, he's got the amateur pedigree. And, what I've seen with him in his career, he has a good knockout percentage, but he's kind of more of a boxer than I think people have always made out. You saw that against when he fought Eddie Chambers and Chigaev, and I could see this actually being that type of a fight. I actually don't even think necessarily Povetkin will be going that aggressively at Fury, trying to put power on him. I actually think even though Fury is a boxer type, he's so defensive that I think Povetkin probably even thinks he can win sort of a boxing match with Huey Fury, and I think he's right about that. I think it's going to be actually a decision, might not be that good of a fight, and that Povetkin's going to have enough left, and he's just a better offensive fighter than Huey Fury, and that Povetkin will pull out the win here. And I think what's not good for boxing fans because of Huey Fury's style is every once in a while I think Hearn does these types of, maybe you look at him as a gamble with his British guys, where he's thinking, well, and we've seen him do this, and from especially like an American fan's perspective, it'll give us something we don't want to see, which is, Hearn's figuring, well, if Fury, fights Povetkin and then he wins, he can be a British sell, because he's having Povetkin go in there against him, and he's got a co-promotional deal with Povetkin now. So I don't know. That's sometimes I wonder if that's the thought process.
Yeah, and you said something that I kind of think is interesting, and I want to piggyback off for a moment. A lot of people do have a tendency to kind of pigeonhole guys stylistically where they say, hey, he's the puncher, hey, he's the boxer. And, it almost sounds like, these are cookbook recipes a lot of times. And, I mean, what you said is true. I mean, Alexander Povetkin was a gold medal winner. It's not often brought up, but he was a gold medal winner. I can't remember which Olympics it was, but he could box, and he's done that with a number of guys. I mean, he didn't stop, who was it, Ruslan Shakayev, I believe, or maybe it was Sultan Ibragimov. No, I think it was Chagayev who was ranked higher. But yeah, he did it with Chagayev, who he had to adjust to, and he couldn't just, and he's never been that kind of guy to just go in and blow you out. Anyways, I mean, anybody who watched the Anthony Joshua fight, I mean, this is a guy, to me, who understands the nuance of the game. Obviously, you don't make it to that level of the amateur ranks without it. I mean, he understands feinting and technique, and, his balance is good and all this other stuff. But I think you're right. I think when you boil it down, Povetkin is probably the better boxer and puncher. Again, I am a bit cautious with the age, just because it's one of those things you just never know with guys sometimes. And he did get knocked out in the Anthony Joshua fight, and it wasn't pretty either. So, but I'm with you. I am favoring a Povetkin win. I am going to go by a late round stoppage. I think he probably boxes a bit more early, and he finds his timing, finds his distance, and then gets the job done. Anyways, we're going to move on to another fight. It's not a particularly loaded weekend, we know, but at least there is something to talk about. It's the a lot of us are just sitting on our hands playing the waiting game until the big fights materialize. And it does look like the fall and winter are going to have finally some good stuff to talk about. But we are going to go with the main event of that card, and it's Vasily Lomachenko. It seems like a lot of these Eastern European guys are now altering their original names. Did you notice Gennady Golovkin is even doing that too now, where they have the I's before the Y's, yada, yada, yada. But you have Vasily Lomachenko, who is the number one fighter at 135. And I would stress that as much as I like him, I do not believe he is the champion at 135. And he's fighting Luke Campbell, who is considered a top 10 fighter. How do you see this?
I mean, I can see the height of Campbell like everybody else, and there's no doubt that Lomachenko did have trouble with Linares, but he stopped him with one shot. And Jose Pedraza, while not winning rounds, hung around with him a little more than expected. But Lomachenko got to him late, didn't quite stop him. But I think that I think that Lomachenko. I don't think this is a fight we need to see. I don't think Luke Campbell's proven all that much to me. I mean, I see these. He was an Olympic gold medalist. He had the amateur pedigree, but hadn't done anything spectacular in the pros. And then, he got dropped early against Linares. Had a competitive fight with him, but I think people got carried away with it. Then, well, okay, he had a competitive fight with Linares, so he still lost, and he lost to Mendy previously, even though he's avenged that. But Mendy, kind of with 17 weight classes, a bottom of the top 10, maybe lightweight type of guy, but an older guy, nothing special. Not the type of guy you would expect a Olympic gold medalist to lose to. And he's got a win over Darlis Perez, but you saw Giasov knock Perez out in 30 seconds last week, and people say, you can't compare, but you can make some comparisons. And what I'm just saying, it all leads up to is, Campbell's never really got a win of note to me. And he's going to be in with one of the top guys in the world, if not the top guy in the world, overall pound for pound, and the mythical pound for pound. Lomachenko is certainly in that conversation, and the number one universally recognized lightweight, whether you look at him as the champ or not. I just don't think this is a fight we need. It's something that they wanted to build up in the UK, obviously. The bizarre part about it for me is not that it happened politically, but how the WBC ended up being the political mechanism for it to happen, since you would normally associate them with PBC. But it just shows that these alphabet guys are always available when you need them. And the selling point.
Whenever they get the scent of cash, they
right. The scent of cash is what got it why they heard it for this one. So, because really, let's think about it for a second. This is a belt that got stripped from Mikey Garcia basically, and then so Lomachenko. I mean, in other words, Campbell doesn't even have this belt. He's fighting Campbell for this belt, but Campbell doesn't have it. So we get this Luke Campbell fight with Lomachenko. In other words, somehow the WBC, even though we know Lomachenko's the number one lightweight in the world, but we know how the alphabets supposedly have their rules and everything. Lomachenko is a champ of another organization. Somehow he became the WBC mandatory to fight for the belt. It's
crazy.
It's just laughable. It's so insane. It's not that it shouldn't be that way, but it's not in their normal rules or anything. So, what I'm getting to is Lomachenko's a minus 2,000 favorite, and it's giving us a Luke Campbell fight, even though with 17 weight classes, Luke Campbell is a top 10 lightweight in the bottom half of the top 10. He's not a guy to me we need to see fighting Lomachenko. I know Campbell's knockout percentage on paper is pretty good, but, to me, like when you see him even against Linares, who's not known for a great chin, you don't see that much power. He didn't do any power with Mendy. I don't think the power's there. I just don't think he's that much of a puncher. I mean, that's what I'm really getting to. And so I don't think he can hurt Lomachenko. But I think Lomachenko can hurt him. And, Lomachenko, a lot of times, he blew out Krolla and, Rocky Martinez, he got early with one shot. But usually he's going to break the guy down a little bit with his boxing skill, frustrate him. I think that'll probably be what this fight will be like. But I think Lomachenko is going to stop him before the end of it. I just don't think this was a fight we needed. I'm not saying either of these guys are necessarily going to take Lomachenko. Certainly not Comey. But, Comey's gotten a lot better. He brings some power. I would have – I'm just giving examples. I would have rather have seen that. I'm still in the camp, even though his last performance was a little off. Because of Teofimo Lopez's speed and power, I'd rather see him, because of his upside. Of course, politics aren't going to let it happen, but certainly, Gervonta Davis would be more of a threat. And I don't mean these, because this has happened with all these guys. It works both ways. It's not a criticism of Lomachenko. It's just the promotional nonsense and the politics that there's better fights to be made than Lomachenko, Luke Campbell, but we're getting Lomachenko and Luke Campbell, and people are saying they're excited. Well, I like seeing Lomachenko fight too, but this fight is not really competitive on paper. And before I throw it to you, Jeremiah, I want to throw one thing out there, because we're seeing it a lot on Twitter and Facebook, that for all those people out there who keep saying this is a tougher fight than people think, they need to define that, because I don't want to hear afterward, if Campbell does a surprisingly good showing, oh, I told you so. In other words, what's the tougher fight than people think? Define it now before Saturday at 5 o'clock U.S. time in the East. Is Lomachenko going to get knocked down by Campbell? Is it going to be a split decision? Is Campbell winning 5 rounds? I want to hear some definitions from all these. This quote-unquote, this is a tougher fight than people think, because I think that Lomachenko is going to stop him before the end of 12 rounds. So that's what I'll put myself out there as. And anybody who thinks to the contrary, if you're going to pick Campbell, pick him now, or define your quote-unquote tougher fight than people think.
Yeah, well, what I think is it's a way of kind of dipping your toes in ambiguity, and so if it does happen,
right.
you look a bit more prophetic. But in a way, I understand it. I do, because there is, this is boxing, and there are a lot of things that could happen, right? But if you see them, like you said, generate that and define it, bring out the nuance in the discussion and tell us how you really feel. My thing about the Lomachenko and Campbell fight is I do think that Campbell is a good boxer. I do think he has gotten better. I do think he was very competitive close with Linares, who was, I think, maybe the number 1, number 2 lightweight in the world at that time, or maybe he was number 3. I can't remember, but I know he's one of the top 2 or 3. It was kind of, Mikey Garcia's stay at that weight division is a little bit fuzzy. But I think what a lot of people are getting at when they think Campbell is going to be competitive is I think they're referring to his size. And, because as you mentioned, Pedraza was pretty good. He was pretty competitive. He wasn't that competitive, but partly because of his size, he was a bit more competitive. People thought the same thing of Jorge Linares. My distinction between Luke Campbell and somebody like Jose Pedraza and Jorge Linares is that the reason I think Linares was able to do so well, and I've always thought that he's a genuine talent. But he's fluid. There's a difference. Campbell is more of the amateur style where he relies on single shots. He does a lot of jabbing, a lot of straight left hands. And Linares, I think, because of his fluidity, is able to follow somebody like Lomachenko a bit better. Whereas, and he's able to open up quicker. His reflexes are better. And I actually think Pedraza is sort of in line with that too, at least more so than Campbell is. I just think those guys are a bit more fluid in their work. So to me, Campbell being, more of the 1-2-1 guy, I just think he's playing into Lomachenko's hands. Lomachenko's faced southpaws time and time again. And, I see it like the odds. I think this is a clear victory for Vasyl Lomachenko. I do think a lot of people who say that, it's probably going to be a body shot or something, I think that's right. I think Lomachenko is a real intelligent fighter. I think he recognizes what he has to do. And when you're fighting guys that are naturally bigger than you, that's what you do. You break down the body. We saw him do it against Linares. So, yes, I see this as a stoppage. I did see, we were talking, you mentioned the potential opponents on the horizon, and it does seem as if, and this is a state of boxing, so I don't always give fighters crap for this because I understand, they're not all thinking in the same terms we are, where we'd like to see, 8, maybe 9 divisions, just eliminate all these artificial barriers, get rid of the titles. It would be nice, but the problem is a lot of these fighters are just working within the structure that they're giving. So I would like to see some of these fights, but it's clear that, like when we talk about Comey and Teofimo Lopez, that fight looks like it's already been made, so we know what the end goal is there. They're going to fight each other, and then whoever wins is going to have to contend with Vasyl Lomachenko because obviously he wants to unify all of the trinket belts. But yeah, I would have rather seen somebody else. And I actually saw Julian Williams on Twitter I think this was about 2 hours ago, and what did he say? He said something to the tune of people are not talking about the right thing. Devin Haney is becoming a mandatory for Vasyl Lomachenko. Gervonta Davis is not even in the same weight class. And I had to have a go at Williams. I appreciate him. He's pushing for VADA. He wants to make sure that he's clean, and Jarrett Hurd is clean going into the fight. But I think when he says something like, Gervonta Davis is not in the same weight class, why are we even worried about it? I just don't think it's to the point. And I think you're creating the artificial barriers higher than need be by doing something like that. And I think it also ignores a few other points that Gervonta Davis obviously struggles with the weight. He's already missed weight, twice in his career. He lost one of his alphabet trinkets because of it. So we already know that 135 is easily doable. We also know that he's not going to be there for much longer. And we also know that I think it's quite clear that he's naturally bigger than a guy like Vasyl Lomachenko. I mean, to me, Lomachenko strikes me as a physical featherweight. I mean, he wasn't even putting on that much weight when he was fighting at 126. So you see stuff like that, and a lot of people. It's kind of like your Jose Carlos Ramirez example with Terrence Crawford. Just stop worrying about all this nonsense and just worry about the fights that we should actually be getting. If Devin Haney turns out to be the guy who gets Lomachenko, I'm fine with that. He seems a bit green at this point. That's okay, but let's not ignore Gervonta Davis just because he's in a different weight class. I mean, to me, it's more complex than that, and that fight you could easily make.
Yeah, I agree. It's really following the sport, talking with the other fans, people in the industry, like you said, in this case, Julian Williams, a fighter, but it's common across all different people that follow boxing or in boxing. There's a lack of knowledge of boxing history about the origin and how these added weight classes we don't need got popularized. This was the alphabets just trying to get sanctioning fees. There's people that don't know their boxing history that are under the false impression that these were added weight classes for some sort of need of safety or because they were necessary. I mean, look, the UFC didn't even add them when they started. They didn't need them for any safety reasons or anything like that. Then sometimes you'll get a defender of these alphabet weight classes who then will pull. And again, Jeremiah, the boxing history. They'll pull out something like some old reports or about, well, there was talk of one, there was a 140 and a 130, which but they weren't regarded as regular weight classes with the original 8. None of the fighters took seriously picking up a 140-pound title then as a substitute for being lightweight champion of the world.
It was synthetic.
Lightweight champion of the world, right? It was just like a side thing. It was like the equivalent of like later on when you had like the USBA and the NABF title. It was like a little like subtitle thing. Like you didn't look at that as like you were a world champion. So it wasn't until the alphabet started picking up and adding to those and popularizing them. It wasn't that people then cared. I think what people underrate is even in, one of boxing golden eras, which was, around 80 to 82 there, nobody still really cared about those junior weight classes particularly until Sugar Ray Leonard started messing around there. And as great as Sugar Ray Leonard was, that was one of his negative legacies to the sport, is that, a great fighter never really messed with those or took them seriously before that. And then when he started doing it, other fighters started doing it. And, I think what people forget, and it wasn't because of necessarily weight at the time, only because of Leonard. I mean, Duran skipped 140 because nobody cared. They say, well, Antonio Cervantes was there, but Cervantes was not paid attention to, particularly in the U.S. at that time, and he just stayed at the 140, and he lost to a 17-year-old Benitez. In other words, a 17-year-old guy beat him. Pryor blew him out when Pryor couldn't get a lightweight shot, and Pryor was
Nicolino Lochi. Yeah, Lochi in the first fight, the scorecards were 15-0 for all 3 judges.
Right. So, it was like, these were afterthoughts. And then it did get popularized, and that's when the confusion got crazy, when your legit top fighters started messing around in those weight classes, which really pretty much didn't occur until Leonard. Carlos Ortiz was there, but then he moved, he went to lightweight because that was where you wanted to be, the lightweight champion of the world, not the 140-pound thing. So, what I just getting back to your point is, I just don't think like you're a historian, but I just think a lot of younger fans don't understand that. That's not like a harkening back, but that just frustrates me, that they don't get it, and they don't get that there's nothing really preventing a lot of these fights like Gervonta Davis or Lomachenko, except for politics, not weight classes, or or Ramirez and Crawford, or you could go with a lot of fights like that.
Yeah.
And we lose out on a lot of good fights, a lot of good matchups, and it gives excuses for these no-hopers to be thrown in there because they say, well, somebody else is at another weight class. Really, I mean, even the way you've been fighting lately, you can argue this, but I mean, really, Burchell might be a more interesting fight for Lomachenko at this point than some of these other guys. And again, then you're going to have fans who don't know better. Oh, he's 130. He's in a different weight class.
Yeah.
And that's how we end up with what we get.
Well, yeah, well, and I don't understand the logic anyhow. It's because, and oftentimes these arguments kind of play into people's own sort of tribal interests, anyways. Where if you're riding or dying with one guy, and it happens a ton of boxing. It's not that I hate the fact. I mean, we're all prone to this sort of thing. I mean, this sort of like in-group, out-group thing. It's not that big of a deal to me. But when you're doing it in what and you'll see it. They'll argue it on one hand, and then on the other they'll say, no, this guy should move up. Like I see it, I've seen a number of times where you'll see guys like, well, Gervonta Davis is at 130, but if Vasil Lomachenko really wants to chase greatness, he needs to go up to 140. I'm like, well, how can how can on one side of your mouth you're arguing one thing, and then the other you're arguing another, and it sucks because I brought this up not long ago, and I even wrote an entire article, about how the weight classes hurt boxing, and you'd figure with the amount of huge matchups we've missed throughout the years, that would be enough to cause people to pick up their pitchforks and their torches and say, hey, clean this shit up. I want the best to fight the best. But it's funny, just the way people are hypocritical in that sense too, where they'll say, hey, I want the best to fight the best. But this guy's at 130, this guy's at this guy's at that. I mean, it's just all these artificial divisions that need not exist, and it's tiresome too because they'll take it as far as the alphabet soup organizations as well. Like, well, this guy's IBF and he's got to fight his mandatory, or else he's going to lose his belt.
Right. Yeah, that's
it's not. It's not. And the thing about it is, the people who often take these things, like if you go to any of the big Facebook groups and you see somebody who, they're essentially like a pseudo-intellectual of boxing, and they're like, oh, well, the IBF states that you got to do this, and the WBA states that you got to do this. It's funny that these people seem to be following the rules of the organizations closer than the organizations themselves, and they lack the depth of history to understand that these are whimsical. These are not hard rules. These are not something that, sometimes they'll strip you, but sometimes that's for the benefit of somebody else's fighter. I mean, it's just politics. It's like politics in Washington, D.C. Follow the money. It's not that difficult, but yeah, you get some guys like that who are like, oh, well, the WBA or the WBC and all this other nonsense. Just cut the shit. We don't need all it. You're just muddying the landscape more than it needs to be. Anyways.
Oh, yeah. That'll drive you crazy. The guy, the pseudo-boxing intellectual who will say to you then, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't understand the WBO's rules.
Oh, yeah. Well,
they make their rules up as they go along, pal. There's nothing to understand.
Well, and that's the thing is, these people are not. The thing you notice with them as well is they're not doing it all the time. They're not saying, hey, this is what the WBA said. Hey, this is what the WBA said. It's too convoluted for anybody to quote these things line for line and tell you exactly what the rules are and what they're not. They don't care about the bylines that much. A lot of these people are just doing it when it pertains to their favorite fighter. And again, it's just a bunch of bullshit. And this is why sometimes people probably peg, but it's like politics sometimes. You talk to some people and they're like, well, are you left or are you right? I'm like, I think for myself. You don't need to pigeonhole me into, one or the other just because maybe that's what you're used to, or that's how the landscape works now. You can think for yourself and say, hey, no, Vasil Lomachenko does not need to defend against his WBA mandatory or whatever the hell it is, and his belt will be stripped. You heard that shit with Povetkin and Anthony Joshua, like, well, this is his mandatory. He has to, or he's going to get it taken away. No, Eddie Hearn is on private jets with Gilberto Mendoza Jr. They're sipping wine and laughing about whatever the hell it is after 18 holes of golf. This is not. It's not this clear-cut game. It's not black and white like you see. Well, like it appears more so in other sports, but yeah, it's just nonsense. Anyways.
Yeah, I remember their days when the alphabets were claiming, again, when it suited some promoter they were working with, that it was against their rules to have an immediate rematch. That now you got alphabets saying that they're stripped guys if they don't have the immediate rematch. Well, look, they just did it with they did it with Klitschko and Tyson Fury when there was going to be an immediate rematch. They said we don't have immediate rematches, we're stripping, and now Ruiz and Joshua have to fight an immediate rematch. Or Ruiz and Ruiz
yeah.
I mean, it's just
yeah, well, and it's like the WBC. They said, oh, we're sanctioning the Fury Wilder rematch. That's what's going to happen. And then the promoters were like, well, no, it's not going to happen. And then now, Tyson Fury gets a couple fights in. Wilder gets to do his own thing. I mean, it's constant. It's never as hard as you want to believe it is. These guys are constantly changing their minds and doing what's best for the pockets, not what's best for the fans. It hasn't been that way for a long time. But
yeah, you just gotta ignore them.
Yeah, exactly, completely. You got to ignore them. You got to stop worrying about the artificial borders like weight classes. They're not as serious as a lot of people would have you believe. It's not that way. Anyways, is there anything else you'd like to go over before we wrap it up?
No, just that's a good point to wrap it up with, because it leads to what I already got in before about, outside of the exciting, it turned out to be exciting, Kovalev and Yarde matchup. There was just a lot of dreadful mismatches shown on all the major U.S. platforms last week, and that's not even, it's going even beyond, forget casual fans aren't even going to look at it, but even hardcore fans, you're taking how many hours out are you supposed to take for these mismatches as a hardcore fan? I mean, when they do these showcases, they're just for hardcore fans now, frankly. Even though they're a mismatch, they're saying, well, we want to expose these guys to you, so who they are and build them up. But no casual fans are watching that. There are no casual fans really, and they're not watching that. So it's just hardcore fans being bombarded with this stuff, and I find myself thinking, how much can hardcore fans put up with this? And just before you say this is ridiculous, give us a competitive matchup. I can't take 3 hours out to watch this stuff, even if you're trying to showcase this guy to me.
Yeah, so I think what it is that hardcore fans follow other sports that are more consistent, and where these seasons end with a crescendo where you get the best versus the best. It's a big event in football, NFL, which is coming up. It's almost a religious observance for a lot of Americans, and boxing could get to that place as with its global appeal. But the current state that it's in, we're never going to get there. And speaking of the NFL, if I don't catch you before the season starts, how do you think the Giants are going to do?
I don't think they're going to do well. Even though I'm a big Giants fan, I don't think they're going to do well this year. But the one thing I'll say optimistically is I got to admit, I was with the crowd with the pitchforks and the torches saying, why did we draft this Daniel Jones guy, number 6? But he's looked really good, so I'm going to be fair to Gettleman, the GM, that he's looked really good, and I think the Eli watch of getting the hook should be on real quickly this season, I would say.
All right. Well, thanks, John, and hopefully I'll talk to you next week. If not, we'll definitely catch you the week after. We'll try to do this a bit more regularly. It seems as if Mike has taken on more. He's been doing a lot of he's been doing more coaching with his football thing. Seems like he's going to be a bit busier with that. So, look forward to us for the next Inside Boxing Weekly. And also, I forgot to say this at the beginning of the show, we're brought to you by BetNow. Go to the website, click on the link, enter Truth50. You get a little something back. We're brought to you by the Retired Boxers Foundation, Jackie Richardson and Alex Ramos. Again, they do a good job. Fighters don't have 401ks. Pitch in a little if you can. And also by Seat Giant. If you go into a boxing match, click the link on the website. Enter, I forget what the hell it is, so never mind, disregard that. But anyways, thanks everybody for tuning in. Have a good night.